Welcome to the 07 to 13 Silverado Power Mirror Gear Replacement video. We're going to start by removing the cover on the power mirror. This can be a little tricky, so you want to start from the inside and work your way out. Takes a little wiggling, as you can see in the video. Be gentle, keep wiggling, and it'll come off. You'll notice there's multiple points of tension in the mirror housing. All these points are going to require you to work with them individually to get them to break loose. Next, we will need to bring the mirror to the outward position. For some of you, a combination of pulling and pushing the mirror button at the same time will get the mirror out. For others, you're going to have to force the mirror in the outward direction. Next, we will focus on wiring. Start by removing the heated mirror wires while holding support on the mirror. If your mirror has excessive rust or is rusty, you will need to cut these wires, and we'll focus on splicing them later in the video. Make sure to use a good quality butt connector when splicing your power mirror wires. Next, we want to remove the power wire from the motor. Most should just pop out, but be gentle. They're getting old in age and could be brittle. You will want to take extra caution when removing the glass from the mirror. Oftentimes, these can hit the ground and shatter and end up costing you more money in the end. After all, we're here to save money on these repairs. After you have applied the tape and have the mirror secured, we want to move forward with removing the glass. Before we remove it, I want to explain how it is installed. There is 4 slots on the rear of the mirror that are securing it in place. Identical on the motor are the 4 perches it sits on. These are held on in there with tension and will require a little work to remove. I like to use a plastic tool in the front with a twisting motion that gives me extra leverage in the front, while at the same time applying a lifting motion in the rear. Oftentimes this works. If the glass has not been removed before, it can be a little bit stiffer. So keep trying, they're probably going to fight you most of the way. Once removed, you'll know it. At this point, you'll want to lift the mirror up and forward in a slow motion until it sticks to the tape. Once it's stuck to the tape, you'll know it's uninstalled, and you can remove it and use the tape to secure the mirror while we move forward with removing any additional wiring. Once removed, you're immediately going to see the wires going to the turn signal. If you don't have a turn signal, you won't see this. If you do, you can simply lift it out and move it off to the side. At this time, you'll secure the mirror with the tape that's still on the glass. With the connector, I like to put my pick in there to slowly separate the connector when they're super stiff. Be careful as you're still holding the glass while you're doing this. Next, you're going to need a T10 or a Torx 10 bit. We'll use this bit to remove the 4 Torx screws holding the power mirror adjusting motor to the mirror frame. Make sure to hold on to these 4 screws because you'll need them again later when we reinstall it. Next, we'll remove the wiring from the back of the motor. This requires a pinching motion and pulling. Set the motor aside, and then we'll start removing the wiring from the frame. Be gentle, as some of these connectors can be brittle. Once all your wires are secured out of the way, we want to focus on removing the front of the mirror frame. This will require a little bit of wiggle and a little bit of prying. As you can see, the top prong is holding it on, and the bottom is wedged in well. This will require a lot of wiggling and a little creativity on your part. Next, we want to remove the pins holding the frame onto the motor. This doesn't take much to remove. A slight tap and a punch, or maybe even a screwdriver, can remove these. Very light taps will remove them. They do not require a lot of effort. Next, we want to remove the frame from the motor housing. This will require a little bit of leverage and some wiggle, but be careful not to yank too hard or you can break the ends off of your electrical wiring. Take your time and pull it through nicely. Next, we will need a T20 or a Torx 20 to remove the 4 screws from the base of the motor. These screws are normally accessible, but if not, you will be forced to crank on the motor manually to gain access to the screws. Once you have the motor removed from its base, you'll have to remove the wires. In order to do this, remove 2 to 3 of the wires first, and then remove the remaining wires. Not all of them will fit through at once. I have the completed motor removed. This is the housing. Now you can buy this complete from GruvenParts and just install from here. It'll make your life easier. But if you've got the motors and you want to do that, we're going to separate this housing. You want to be careful when separating this housing, as the screwdriver we're going to use can protrude past this part and break the plastic underneath. You don't want to do that, so just make sure that all we're trying to do is push these flats out enough that we can separate the housing. I'm going to start by tapping my screwdriver down in there. Kind of wiggle it a little bit. Same on the other side. I'm going to do this all the way around. Now at the same time, I'm putting upward force on this black plate here to help lift it out of its space. As you can see, it kind of came apart there. We'll work back to the other side here. And it is apart. Having removed this cap, you're going to see you put a little stress all around the sides here. We want to go ahead and kind of straighten this out before we reassemble it, and this will help hold the unit together on reassembly. Alright, this is a prime time to pay attention to how this thing is assembled. You'll notice here on the motor you've got your plugs. That is because on the housing, that is where your plug inserts. So just remember that when assembling, to put everything in how you took it apart. So some of you, your motor will come out, some of you it won't. Just depends on how it's meshed in the gear. This one's going to stay until we separate everything. Here we want to separate this lock washer from this housing. You'll notice that there's a couple of grooves. You've got this wider groove here, and this groove and that groove that are just recessed. That's where this locking point sets in the washer. What we want to do is press this washer and spring in the downward direction and rotate this spring from one side to the other. Once it's rotated into this opening, we'll relieve the pressure and that'll remove the lock washer. I'm going to use a socket in this demonstration to press in and rotate. Most of you can use a piece of PVC, you can use whatever you want, just as long as it's something round that can push the pressure on there. Now this only needs to go in as far as to get that out and rotate. So not very far. Okay, now you can mark this with a Sharpie or anything. I've got this little washer indentation here I'm going to use for reference. This is going to tell me how far I'm rotating the washer. You can see the distance that it's coming out is far greater than it was before. That's how you know for sure it's off of there. We want to go ahead and disassemble our motor assembly after the spring is off. You want to start by taking this cup out. This cup holds everything in place when the spring's in. Simply remove it, place it off to the side. The next will be this base, and this will come off with the electric motor. Now you can pull the motor out by itself because you have plenty of slack. Place the motor off to the side and separate the black plastic cap. This cap is going to hold the drive gear. As you'll see on separation, many of you will have a broken gear in here and possibly even a damaged spur. Either way, this is where your broken gear will be. These brass washers will be reused, so make sure you reuse them when using the new gear. In order to separate this, you can get a little pick in here and just pry up on it. And then lift with your hand. And that removes the old gear. You want to test fit the new gear a few times to make sure everything fits. As this new brass gear is more robust, it might rub on the housing in this area here. If that's the case, you want to trim that with a razor knife, or you can use your Dremel, anything that makes it easier, but it might rub this housing right here. So trim that back before installation. If you don't and it's rubbing, it's just going to make everything louder during operation. So in order to make it quieter, make sure you trim this back a little bit if it is making contact. Alright, I have the new gear ready to install. This is going to be a test fit. Press it in. On either side, make sure your brass bushing's where it should be, and then rotate it. Mine's hanging up a little bit. Hear that? I need to just scrape a little bit off with a razor so that way I don't get that noise. Here I'm taking my razor and I'm just gonna run it right up here. You can see that little groove right there. Just gonna kind of flatten that out. Took my razor and just ran it right up here. I've pulled probably that much material out. Alright, now that it's all trimmed up, it's very quiet and it spins freely. If you have that issue, make sure you trim it. Next, we're going to disassemble the rest of the assembly. This is going to be your gear that everything pivots on. Now this can, make sure you put this back just how you found it. Alright, this lower gear, you also want to put it back just how you found it, but we want to grind these little tabs off right here.
Now comes time to install the collet, and as everyone was paying attention when uninstalling it, they know right where the marks go. In this example, you'll see if it is on the left side or pointing towards the passenger window, that goes to the passenger side. If it was roughly facing the front of the vehicle, that would be on the driver's side. Here I'm going to install the base in multiple ways, as an example of showing you how it can go the wrong way if installed incorrectly. As you can see, for the passenger side, that was rotating correctly, but once moved, it was rotating the wrong way. So check the way it's seated on the base prior to installation of the collet. Once you feel as if it's going the correct direction,
install the collet in the way it was removed. In this example, I'm pointing it towards the passenger's window as this is the left side. After installing the collet, I'm going to install the main gear. Please note, if this gear is broken, which they seldom are, you will need to rotate this gear to get the broken tooth as far away from the operating area as possible, pointing the broken tooth to the inside or towards the window if at all possible. Next, we're going to install our base with our new motor and gear, followed by installing the spring and the locking ring. This is similar as to what you did earlier, except for we're going together with it. So use the same socket with the markings on it. And we'll compress the spring and lock it in. This might take a time or two to get it right, as the spring is quite stiff. Once you have your locking ring installed, you'll need to verify the installation of the electric motor. If the two holes are facing outward, such as in the example here, you have it wrong and you need to rotate it. You do not want to install these backwards and have to disassemble the housing twice. Make sure you get it right. This is wrong. Now you want to bolt the base to the mirror housing on the vehicle. Once it's bolted on, you'll want to use some channel locks to crimp down the top part of the housing. This can be a little tricky, so it's easiest done when sitting on the vehicle. Take your channel locks and crimp down the back, followed by crimping down the front. This will ensure everything is locked into place. It is at this point in the operation you want to test the motor and make sure everything is working freely and not binding up. If there is an issue, now would be the time to fix it. Also, don't be afraid at any point during the process to stop and check the operation of the motor and make sure nothing has bound up. Next, we'll want to reinstall the plastic frame that goes to the main mirror housing. This is fairly simple. You'll just run your wires through and slowly press down and wiggle. It can be a little stiff to get in, so make sure you hold everything still while pushing it in. After this, you'll want to start putting in the pins. Once it's in, go ahead and insert it into the clips on the mirror. You'll need to wiggle the frame up and down to make sure the pins insert correctly. The pins also run through the metal motor housing, so they don't exactly line up perfect until you wiggle it. Next, we're going to tap the pins into place. It doesn't take much to get these pins into place, and I'll demonstrate that by using the end of my screwdriver to tap them in one at a time. As you can see, they go in fairly easy. Now is as good a time as any to go ahead and check for operation. Make sure there's no binding. As everything's good, we're going to go ahead and install the skeleton of the frame. To start, the two green arrows show where you need to put the two tabs. If you don't do this, you'll have to take it off and do it again. Once the frame's installed, we want to go ahead and start running our wiring through that controls your power mirror motor. This is fairly simple. Run it through while pulling on the other side. Once through, look at your motor and you'll see it's got a little notch in it. This is where the plug goes in the same direction. Match it up and plug it in. Now we can move forward with the installation of the motor. This is where you'll need those 4 torque screws you took out earlier. Now that you have the motor installed, you want to go ahead and hook up the electrics on the mirror. As you can see, once you have them hooked up, this plug will pop into the snaps on the mirror. Now comes the tricky part, installing the mirror onto the motor. This can take a little bit of work and a little finagling, but you can get it on there. Simply line up all the tabs and push it down. I like to use a little leverage on the top with my plastic tools. Some of you may have better luck just putting your hand flat on the glass and pressing down. For those of you that disconnected the wires going to the mirror defrosters, now would be the time to go ahead and hook those back up. For those of you that had to cut the wires, we're going to focus on splicing those now. To start, we need to strip off a small amount of sheathing on the wires. This will be a very small amount if using this type of butt connector. Once you have the wires prepared, you need to insert them into the butt connector. The center part of this butt connector is solder, so when it reaches a certain temperature, it will splice your wires together. On the outside is some red rings that help secure it and keep it from coming apart in future incidents. Once you've prepped your wire, you can now use a heat gun, a lighter, or a torch to heat up this butt connector. You'll know when the butt connector is done when the center solder shrinks and is now sealed. Once the butt connector dries and cools down, You can see that it is very strong and you can pull on it. At this point, your connection is now fixed. You can now test the function of your mirror, adjust your glass, check your turn signals for operation, and confirm that everything is installed properly. At this point, you will secure all your wires and install the outside cover. This now completes the installation of your aftermarket metal gears into your power mirrors. Now if you're parked somewhere and some yahoo runs into your mirror, it's going to give. You're not going to have broken parts like previously.